Bob Kopich here, Kevin Dukevich, who is going to be the smarter of the two of us. Not that that's that big of a challenge. Challenge accepted, sir, but it's going to go downhill. But anyway, what this is the topic is officially 5 ways to cut IT costs. And really what we decided to do, because we're seeing all over the place, and I've been at a couple of conferences. I was in Chicago at CompTIA, at peer meetings. I've been at some events here in Northeast Ohio. And a lot of organizations are talking about the recession. And some of them are talking about what if, others are talking about it's already here. And a lot of people are talking about it from the standpoint of we're going to have to cut costs. We're going to have to stop hiring. We're going to have to do this, that, or the other thing. And what we thought we'd do is we thought we would actually try to give some advice from the IT perspective. And we're still working on how the details are going to go. So bear with us a little bit on this, but this is our first one of these. And essentially, the first one is going to be talking about IT costs and some ways to control, perhaps not hugely, but this stuff adds up. And we would love to see feedback. Right now, the chat is very much available, so add some comments or feedback. We would love that, and we'll open it up for Q&A at the end of this. And actually, Kevin, why don't you explain where you were over the past few days, if that's allowed? I shouldn't even be, cautious about that.
So, yeah, I actually just came back home less than 12 hours ago, quite honestly, from DEF CON 30, held over in Las Vegas. I went out there, DEF CON started on Thursday, and I went out there Wednesday. So that was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, up to my ears in like very, very serious hacking exploits. And when I say hacking, I was there watching people literally hack a voting machine. I saw you probably see on the news the Starlink hack that someone came up with. That was actually announced a couple days before at Black Hat, not at DEF CON, but definitely people were talking about it. I watched some glorious hacking tutorials on Teams, that we're using right now. By the way, the takeaway is turn on MFA, and if you don't have MFA for Teams, you're going to have a bad day. Turn it on, please. And it was just that kind of thing over and over and over again. I think probably the most comical, which I shouldn't even say comical, was one of the villages was dedicated to biohacking. So there was a bunch of medical devices in there. And to even enter the room, I had to read a affidavit of saying that, the stuff that's going on in that room is live medical devices that could be used on people. And if you see any problems with them, please report them. Literally after reading the piece of paper, someone at the door asked, are you agreeing to the content of this, the code of conduct to walk in, and you promise not to kill anyone? And she wasn't joking. So it's a very, very serious conference. I think there was something like 30,000 people who are attending it. So I have had a pretty interesting last couple of days.
And for what it's worth, I was at DEF CON back in 2002 because I am old, and it was you have to sign up with cash. You have to register with cash, and really the registration, there's no identification or the like, and you basically turn your phones off. I mean, it is a serious event from a security standpoint, but we need to be knowledgeable about this stuff. Anyway, moving on. So want to talk about the 5 ways to cut IT costs and the like. And essentially what we're really going to be going after is we want to talk about being methodical is better than knee-jerk. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of organizations that will respond with a knee-jerk reaction as far as, oh my God, we got to cut costs. We've got to, go out and sell everything we possibly can, no matter what the price is or whatever. We want to basically come up with some advice and some things that you can do that would hopefully be a little bit safer for you guys. And we're also going to try to give you some ideas of where some hidden expenses, things that you're paying for, whether it be hard dollars or soft dollars. And then we also want to finally talk about risk as a cost, because when we're going over this stuff, part of it was talking about, well, cybersecurity. Should we talk about ways to cut costs in cybersecurity? That's a tough question, and one that actually deserves its own webinar. So, and what are we talking about? We're really talking about this if you're concerned about recession impacting your organization, and you want to create a, for lack of a better word, leaner IT. And you also, one of the big things, because this is something we'll probably spend a bit of time on, is you want to check out your phantom IT, which is a big buzzword these days, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. And then, of course, we always use the banana magic wand, whatever that means. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to give you an idea of where you can see what costs can be cut, but as important is know what the implications are. Because any of us can do a 20% cut on a budget. We don't need that stuff anymore. And then you find out, oh, in fact, you did. Or a circumstance or a situation happens that, oh, if you only you'd known. So we want to be responsible. All of us do, especially those of us who are providing IT service and support for our employers. We want to do that. So, and then the other thing is, really, what is the short-term versus long-term benefits and impacts? And in some cases, the short term hates the long term, and the long term hates the short term, because we can, if we spend a bit of money now, we're going to save money in the long run. Or if we save some money now, we're going, can go vice versa. And it's okay with that, but you need to have some kind of thought process that goes through that. Okay. And we'll be using kind of both of these terms throughout this whole conversation. So we basically have the two of us, and I see by looking at the attendee list, a lot of you folks already know us. I'm CEO Simplex-IT. I've written 3 books, and whereas Kevin actually has done the work. So there's a little bit of a difference between us from that aspect. But Kevin, you want to talk about yourself a little bit? Who you are?
Yeah, I mean, jack of all trades is pretty accurate. I've dealt with stuff for, as it says here, 28 years. I've seen a few things, and definitely leverage on all those years of experience. I usually tell people, I cut my hair real short, but a lot of it's starting to turn white. I do not have white hair. I have what I refer to as wisdom highlights. So it's one where, like, this patch over here is dealing with malware back in like 2006, and over here, yeah, there's a lot of different things. I usually do leverage a lot of that experience for, uh, okay, I've worked with this thing in the past. I know about what the pains are. I know about what the costs are. So I take all of that kind of stuff, coming back to what we're doing here. And it's like, yeah, you can kind of expect this. This is about what it's going to cost you. These are the things you're going to look forward to or hate or like about it. So it does actually work out pretty well for dealing with people.
Cool. And it really makes for a good tag team here, because I'm going to be talking about stuff from a bit of a higher altitude and all that, and then Kevin can correct me on the reality behind it and the like. So, and again, um, absolutely feel free to add stuff in the chat if you see some thoughts or ideas you want to add to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to communicate ideas and just here are some things you can do, some advice. And we're doing this because we're all in this together. This is not something where, so you're not going to really hear a sales pitch here. And you're not going to hear something that the only way this stuff that'll work that we're going to talk about will be is if you work with Simplex-IT. We'd obviously love that. We have some clients who are on this. And also, in some cases, you may hear some stuff and you may be a client with Simplex-IT and you haven't really seen some of the stuff we're suggesting because we haven't finished developing it yet. So, and again, simplify the complex. That's what we're all about. And we take that very seriously. So 5 ways to decrease IT costs. Enough of the silliness. Let's get to it. The caveats, we've always got caveats, this is for small to medium organizations. And also this is for organizations that don't already have high level risk and cost controls already in place. Because quite honestly, That's where you find this stuff. If you already know what you're doing, how you're doing it, how much you're paying for it, and what is the cost benefit for it, then this should be a lot of this stuff should be ongoing discussions and nothing new. And it's also finally a very high altitude discussion. We can get down into the weeds somewhat, especially if you have any specific questions, but it's high altitude. So we're going to talk about 5 things. We're going to talk, and there is overlapping here. We're going to talk about Phantom IT.
Have you ever met an idiot? Hi, I'm Bob Coppage. Okay, now you have. In yesterday's webinar, when we talked about stuff, I actually accidentally used the phrase Phantom IT a couple of times, where I should have been using Shadow IT through and through. There are some people who still refer to Shadow IT as Phantom IT, and it's a kind of, I'm showing my age thing, but the term should have been Shadow IT all the way through. Drew and Patty have been saying, send us the webinar recording, send us the webinar recording, and I've been trying to figure out exactly how stupid I was. You can listen, decide for yourself. Pretty stupid.
Which is a great buzzword. We're also going to talk about when you have services that overlap, meaning you have 2 services that do essentially the same thing. We're going to talk a little bit about CAPEX versus capital expenditures versus operational expenditures, and why they may be benefits or opportunities there and why there might not be. And then we're going to talk about leasing, because leasing may be more of an opportunity than it's been in a few years, because some of the more creative things that some leasing companies are doing. And then we're going to finally talk about risk review. And you'll notice we don't have a bullet point for cybersecurity. And the reason being is because of risk review. So with that, first of all, Phantom IT. It's a great buzzword. It sounds really scary. And we will be sending everybody a link with the recording of this webinar. We'll also include a link, because we did a video a couple of weeks ago, I think, which really defined what Phantom IT is and goes into detail to a certain degree about it. But really what Phantom IT is any IT resource. And this could be hardware, it could be software, it could be software as a service, subscriptions, services, anything that employees within an organization are using. It could be entire departments, but whoever is responsible for the overall IT or manager of the organization is unaware or is not fully aware that it's going on. So now notice, I'm not saying it's evil. I'm not saying it is illegal. I'm not saying anything except for you don't know from a management, organizational management or IT management standpoint. And so this is what, because almost every time you read anything about Phantom IT, they talk about the horror, the risks, and there are risks to be sure. But for purposes right here, we're talking really from the standpoint of we're talking about it from a control and from a cost standpoint. And here's the thing about Phantom IT is you need to deal with it. You need to manage it, and you need to get it out of the shadows. Beyond that, I don't care what you do. And so, for example, one of the most common things, and Kevin, I know we've seen this several times, has been where people who were historically working from home. This is before the pandemic. Would use a Dropbox, and they would have their own Dropbox account so they could have files move back and forward, and they could share it with their clients or their customers or whoever. And nobody at corporate IT was the wiser for it. And the problem is you don't know, you as management, you don't know whether this stuff is properly backed up, whether it's properly licensed, whether it's secure, whether it's any of these things, because you don't see it. So one of the first things you need to do is you need to create a shadow IT policy for your organization. And this is really, and it can be or it should be as in-depth and detailed as any of your other policies. But do you allow people to install software, to sign up for services, to do any of those things without some kind of blessing from the overlords? And Kevin, can you give some ideas why that's not a great idea to just let people go and sign up for stuff?
I say usually the big one is someplace like download.com or some of those other CDN content delivery places that will have links to applications that you think are okay. But when you dig into the installers, they are actually burying other things in there. Not necessarily malicious, but plenty of times they'll tack in things that will just track user data and then submit that user data to places where the information will be sold. Usually not a good thing, not necessarily bad, but it's you got to have a policy for this kind of stuff. What is acceptable risk in your organization? And you'll notice this first thing here, this is not a technology solution. This is sitting down with management or whoever controls this kind of stuff at an organization and say, hey, by the way, what is our policy on this particular thing? Nothing to do with technology or no tools or whatever thrown at the problem. You have to be able to come up with this.
Yeah. And a couple other things. You don't know whether or not their stuff is backed up. So you may have employees who are actually taking materials, developing, sharing, whatever, and it's not backed up. So something bad happens, and then all of a sudden you're out of data, or that employee leaves. So you have all sorts of your traditional security questions, backup availability questions, accessibility questions, all of these, but nobody who can speak for the organization is making decisions. So that's why the policy is important there. Then the second thing you need to do is, okay, now you need to find out what kind of shadow IT you have. By the way, we didn't even talk about the costs. These things could be costing the organization money. So the company may still be paying. If you look through your credit card statements, you may see, oh, we're paying for Dropbox. And again, I'm using Dropbox simply as an example. But it could be significantly more than that. It could be deeper than that. It could be where a department is using a particular product or service. Could be it. So what do? You first discover and you analyze. And unfortunately, there's a couple of layers and ways to do that. And we actually have, because for our monitoring and the like, we have some ways to access some of this stuff. And one of the things we're going to be doing in the near future is actually trying to put together some actual reports that can give better ideas on this, as far as what clients are actually using. And Microsoft 365 actually has some built-in reports as well. So that can help you figure out whether or not there are certain services that are being used, third-party services, cloud services that are being used. So there's a couple of things, but then you also have, are people bringing their computers from home into the office or accessing? And if they are owned by the employee, is that legit? So a whole bunch of different ways or a whole bunch of different resources that you want to just review and discover and then analyze whether or not they're being used properly or not. Then you got to manage it. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, like our RMM software, remote monitoring management, that software creates a application inventory at least once a day, and you can force it to do it more often. That is pretty easy just to whip up a report after that thing's done for a location. And it'll give like how many instances of the software is installed. And that kind of list could be handed over to management or whoever at a business for review and say, hey, here's all these different line items. Give it a look and see if everything here looks, appropriate. I've also come across tools, again, going back to Dropbox because it's such a prevalent one. Dropbox, as far as like us, the MSP is concerned, and I think they'll do it on the enterprise space as well. They actually have a service that if you tell them, hey, xyzcompany.com wants to know how many email addresses are bound to Dropbox using the company domain. And then they can give you the list of email addresses, and then we can take that to management and say, hey, we saw this many people have signed up for Dropbox using their work account. Do you know about this? Usually it's used as a tool for upselling, but at the same time, you can use it to bring up these, these first 2 points very easily.
Yeah, and you'll notice we're kind of in some ways implying that like salespeople are notorious for doing some of this stuff, but it can be anyone on any side of the fence. But then we need to manage it. So what do we talk about when we talk about managing the Phantom IT? Is one is you remove the resource if it's inappropriate, if it's not legal, if it creates vulnerabilities, whatever. Now I want to be real clear here: the employee who's using it may have the best of intentions. may just be looking to do their job better. So this is not necessarily talking about it from a standpoint of you need to go after the employee, or now after you put a policy in place if they're violating the policy, that's different. The other thing is assuming that these people don't have administrative rights to their desktops, they shouldn't be able to install this stuff unless it was already installed when the administrative rights were taken off or somebody inadvertently gave the approval. So another way to control the creep of Phantom IT is to remove the administrative rights, which you should do anyway. And we've also got a video on that, which we'll include a link for that. We've actually been adding a lot of videos lately. So the options are remove it, remove the resource and replace. And by remove the resource and replace, there may be a better one. There may be one you're already using, OneDrive for Business, as opposed to Dropbox. But there may be stuff that you're already using, or there may be a better resource that, because you may talk to the employee or the employees who are using the Phantom IT and you go, wow, that's a really great idea, but you can implement something that integrates better throughout the organization. So remove the resource, remove it and replace. And then finally, is like Kevin was saying, implement it. If you look at it, wow, that's really cool, but we want to control that. Then you could look for ways to implement that exact same software, in which case it's the exact same thing, roughly speaking. There may be some configuration changes to make it conform to your best practice. But now you've got a solution that is no longer, it's out of the shadows. It's part of what you do and how you do it. So, okay. The second one that we have that we're talking about is overlapping services. And honestly, there's a little bit of duplication here, but in this case, we're talking about stuff that it's not Phantom IT. So, but this is something where you may have within your organization multiple, and this could be hardware, it could be software, it could be services, it could be support agreements, it could be anything, but you've actually got multiple versions to do the same job. This is especially true for organizations that have what we call the geological dig, where you've had things there for a while. And here you have to identify the IT resources, and these could be software as a service, could be third party, could be support, could be hardware, could be whatever. But look for overlap where whatever these services are that are costing money, is it also being done by something else? So for example, if you moved your email off of your on-premise Exchange server, is that Exchange server still running? Is it covered under warranty? Is it being backed up? Is it just still nobody got around to actually getting rid of it? That's taking some cost. It could be taking costs from your support contract. It could be taking costs by time and material of people actually looking at it and patching it. It could be, we get down to, we're doing backups. It's taking up energy, all of that kind of fun stuff. So that's an example. We also have found other situations where companies will still have machines that are up watching alarm systems that haven't been active in 5 years. Phone system equipment that's from old removed phone systems or the like. And we've also seen in some cases where there are support agreements for these things that everybody's just been paying the annual invoice. So look for opportunities where those costs are going to see whether or not they're either overlapping or they're no longer needed. And again, Dropbox versus OneDrive, Kevin.
And say I can recall, well, this was probably about 15 years ago. Yeah, 15, 16 years ago. I can remember where I used to work, there were services out there that would take your phone bill and just kind of review it and go over with you, like, what is this number? Like, they would go pull up all the public records they could and say, okay, you've got these 30 phone numbers. We looked on your phone system and how that's configured. We don't see those phone numbers anywhere. So you're paying for all of these extra phone numbers, and why do you still have them? Their sales pitch was they can normally save you some money by cutting off all the services and whatnot that you weren't using. So it's not a new concept. It's been around for a while. It's just a little bit different, as the technology and the services have changed over the years.
Absolutely. And you even have some of the same sort of things that can be happening with people's internet providers, for example. Do you still need all of the range of the IP addresses, the private IP addresses, or public IP addresses, excuse me? The things along those lines. Do you need all the switches? If you've been switching around to a word from anywhere, and you don't have people who are as active as at the on the on-prem location. So you look for that kind of thing as well. Um, and then the final one on this is the multiple support parties who are handling the same resources. So we've found several companies who actually had 2 or 3 people who were providing training, online training or otherwise, or people who were, we monitor the entirety of IT, and then somebody else monitors only a subset, but you're essentially using, and this is key, they're using the same tool set roughly and providing the same level of analysis and support. Can you switch one of them so that they're only on a time and material basis and the other one gets the primary? Things along those lines. So you basically take a look at the services that you have, you look for the overlapping, you look for the stuff that is no longer appropriate based on what your active technology is, and you basically cut back based on that. I think those are possibilities. Now, the problem on that is a lot of them are annual. So some of them you may discover something that was just renewed, in June. Oh, geez, it's August. We got 10 months, but you're going to save the money down the road. Okay. This one's tricky. When we talk about CAPEX versus OPEX, and this is basically the capital expenditure, we're buying assets, we're buying product versus we're just paying for the ongoing operations. I'm not going to get too much into the weeds as far as the definition goes. There is a myth out there that the cloud is cheaper than on-premise. Okay, it can be, but it can also be much more expensive. But the problem is that if you take your organization, and let's say your organization is currently primarily on-prem, and you decide to move to cloud-based, you're going to have a migration fee. However you want to define it, some third party is going to have to migrate your resources up to the cloud, configure all the devices to move towards all that, yada, yada, yada. There are some operational changes that are going to happen. And at the end of the day, the monthly fees that you're now going to pay for the as a service offerings, infrastructure as a service, whatever, whether it be Azure, AWS, whatever, are probably going to be close to what your current operational costs are from a support standpoint. But you've got that additional migration costs, learning cost, all of that kind of fun stuff. So out of the gate to say, hey, if we just move to the cloud, we're going to save a ton of money. Not necessarily so. But, Kevin, I'll put you on the spot because it's fun. There are some times where, and some circumstances where it does make sense to do that. You want to?
Yeah, so usually when I talk to people about, hey, your server's getting a little long in the tooth and it's time to replace it. Let's talk about moving to cloud-based resources. A lot of time that's a problem for companies because they don't even understand exactly what they're doing. So they need to kind of look back at themselves and say, oh, what's this process really doing over here? And then when you start identifying all that stuff and adding like, oh, if that's running up in Azure, that's going to be a huge bill because of a massive processing power, or this is going to generate some huge amount of data, and to get that data out of Azure is a huge expense. You really have to look at what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then once you understand all of that, then it's easier to make the decision of, oh, is the cloud going to be cheaper? Is the cloud going to be more expensive? And then there are some businesses that they just like their CapEx. They like getting something and just running it into the ground for 7, 8, 9+ years. Because from a financial standpoint, that's the way their money works. They might just get very large contracts, and there's a lot of money at once, so they'll burn it on that. Some of them, they do have a pretty steady flow, and the OPEX makes more sense. Really just comes down to just understanding your business processes, the financials, and stuff like that.
Yeah. The one thing though is that the best time to consider it is when you're getting to the end of the lifespan, near not at, when you're getting near the end of the lifespan of your existing equipment. Because if you replace or upgrade that equipment, you're going to get that CAPEX expenditure. So you're going to be faced with a cost, whether it be CAPEX replacement or the migration to the as a service cloud. So that's the sweet spot of time. And especially in the case of servers and the like, there are times during the lifespan of this equipment where to maintain a manufacturer's warranty, which we always recommend strongly for critical equipment, critical meaning that your operations is significantly impacted by downtime, where the cost of managing a usable warranty goes up significantly. I think for servers, it's 6 years usually. Is that right?
Our normal goal is at 4 years, try and start that discussion on a piece of hardware. Say, hey, this thing's going to be a year old. It does take time. There are still plenty of issues with supply chain where it can take months to get a server. So I'd much rather start that discussion somewhere around 4 years. Most servers, you can get a warranty somewhere between 5 and 7 years. But if you just have that talk a little bit earlier, that gives you plenty of time, especially like what I was saying, to understand your own processes, dig into that stuff, and then you can make a better educated decision.
And especially for those of you, and I know there's a couple here who are in the IT support side of things, you've got to keep management informed. So you've got to talk to them. And to me, the best time to start talking to them about these sort of concepts was yesterday. All right. Okay. We'll go with today if we have to. So you want to have those discussions that basically prepare them for the overall time frame of where we're going to see this opportunity and the like. So, cool. So that's basically what we got for the CAPEX and OPEX. And this one's actually kind of simple, but it's something that has changed since I've really been involved with any leasing. And we just have not been involved with many leasing opportunities, and partially because the interest rates were so low for organizations just to get a loan to pay for it. But now, apparently leasing agreements can include the actual implementation costs for the project. And historically, that's not been the case, or it's been harder to find providers that were willing to do that. And that might make it more agreeable to organizations that are looking. They've already decided they're going to do the CAPEX, but their cash flow questions or the cash flow issues, like Kevin was saying, they're not getting that big chunk of money from the client to start with. They're going to have to manage the cash flow. So don't forget leasing. Don't forget leasing. And there are some companies, some good companies, leasing companies that actually specialize in IT leasing and IT leasing involving projects and the like. So we can help you with that.
See, leasing is nice from a management standpoint because you are literally bound by a time frame for the lease. So you know if you have a 5-year lease, at year 4, you have to talk about what are we going to do when this lease ends? Are we going to do a buyout on it? Are we going to replace it with something new? Are we going to move to the cloud? It really does force your hand to making these decisions instead of, oh, I'll get to it later. Well, later never comes until it passed. So yeah, this is a good one for staying a little bit closer to the edge of keeping things supported. Very important when it comes to like cyber insurance and compliance fun.
Yep. Cool. And then I think one of our last ones is actually risk review. And this is, I want to be very, very careful here. This is not necessarily a way to save money. This is also as important a way for you not to shoot yourself in the foot in order to save a couple of bucks. But you essentially sit down, and this is a tabletop discussion with management or the like, and we'd love to be part of that with anyone. What bad things could happen, and how badly would they impact the organization? And risk, this is not many people actually, they love to talk about risk, but they don't necessarily know what risk actually means. It is the impact that a situation or circumstance would have on your organization times the probability. So, asteroid hitting the Earth, impact, significant. Probability, Bruce Willis aside, minimal. So we really don't need to do anything as far as handling risk goes. Power outage. Okay, I don't know what the impact would be. The probability is hopefully somewhat higher than an asteroid hitting the Earth. What would happen to the organization? And the reason I'm suggesting this is because when you take a look at the risk that your organization is facing for certain things failing, for certain things, certain people not being available, for certain technologies to whatever, by understanding what the risk is, now you know whether or not you can save money, whether or not it would be a prudent idea to save money by cutting some costs on that, versus if you just say we could save money. To Kevin's point earlier, okay, we've got the servers running, they're a little bit older in the tooth. Boy, our warranty costs just went skyrocketing because they're 7 years old. Okay, let's save money, let's cancel that. Well, what's the cost of downtime? Because the likelihood of downtime is going up because the servers are, end of life. So the probability of it is going higher. What's the impact? Well, the impact is not as bad because we've got business continuity disaster recovery devices. So we're only going to be down while we boot up from a backup. Well, what's the impact there? You see what I'm saying? So you can have this discussion where you talk about the risk, and then you can make decisions as to whether or not to exclude a warranty renewal. Or you may look at the server and go, yeah, we need the server, but we only use that for historical data. And we've got good backups for it. So if it goes bad, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah,
But
we
you have
actually
to
had
have
a,
the risk discussion, Kevin.
Oh yeah, definitely. I say we used to have a client some number of years ago that I think their calculation was about $20,000 or $25,000 an hour lost.
Yep.
If their equipment was down. It's a big plating facility. If they couldn't make parts, yeah, they were losing gobs of money every hour. So once they started looking into how much that downtime cost them, it was pretty easy to justify, like Bob was saying, a BCDR device that could get them up and running again. You could also start looking into other things like, hey, if we bought 2 servers at the same time and did something called failover clustering, we could get them back up and running a lot quicker given certain types of failures. You're talking from hours from a BCR recovery to minutes to a failover cluster recovery. So it's just making sure you understand what those that, like Bob has been saying, the impact and probability of the stuff and what your costs are, so you have a better understanding. And again, it goes back to making that educated decision on stuff.
And this is especially true if you start talking about cutting costs over on the security side. Okay, because it's going to be very tempting for someone to basically say, do we need all these layers of monitoring? Do we need the latest in this? Do we need this and, do we need belt and suspenders? And to be able to essentially say, well, the impact is going to be the same. If we're hacked, we're hacked. But the probability of it just went up by this percentage or this amount, and percentage is somewhat arbitrary. But to have those discussions, especially when IT support people or managed service providers are talking to management about trying to control the costs, is always, always, always think of it in terms of risk management. And that doesn't mean you're trying to talk somebody into or out of something. You're trying to make them more educated so they have a better understanding of what the impact or potential impact is through a decision. I don't think we use this just simple concept of impact times probability as the definition of risk.
This very concept is part of the reason why cyber insurance places are really cracking down on things like MFA, kind of like what I hinted at earlier, and beefing up just overall best business and security practices, because they recognize the impact of not doing things like MFA, and then they look at the probability of not having MFA, like, oh, you guys are going to get burned if you don't do this. And when you get burned, it's going to cost me money. So this is a pretty big growing trend, and definitely worth talking about.
So I not only have one video reference, I have 2 video and 1 webinar reference. So first of all, we've got a video that we just did recently on specifically what is MFA, what is multi-factor authentication. And we also did another video that was talking about an incident that happened earlier this year where Travelers Insurance, who's leading the charge on MFA requirements, actually is suing one of their clients. Because what Travelers did, short story long, is they made essentially you had to agree that you had multi-factor authentication in on several layers throughout your organization before they would consider you now for renewal or for new policies. And one of their clients had done so, and they got hacked. The client did. And at first, Travelers was, okay, well, we got a policy with you, we got to do it. But then they discovered that the company didn't actually have the MFA implemented as fully as they claimed they did. And so Travelers is now suing that client and essentially saying, we don't have to pay anything out because you didn't do what you said you were going to do. So that is by far and away going to be a big issue moving forward, is not only are the cyber security insurance requirements going to be in place and the cost going to grow exponentially if you don't have these things in place, but also insurance companies are going to hold you accountable that you actually do have the stuff implemented. And this company, because apparently they just didn't, period. So not only are they going to end up with no support from the insurance company, but they're also out whatever they were paying in their policy payments because it didn't do a doggone bit of good. So we got a video on that as well. And tentatively, spoiler alert, we actually are going to have a video in October talking about cyber insurance. We've got a special guest for that one. So it's not just going to be Kevin and I blathering on. Nobody wants to. So those are, I believe, the 5 steps. And as we threatened or promised, they're high altitude stuff. If your organization already has good controls, good monitoring and management, and all that kind of fun stuff, you may look at a lot of these things and go, well, yeah, duh. But a lot of organizations are going to be taking the time at this point to take a look at their organizations and say, oh my God, the recession is coming. What can we do? This gives you some steps that you can do on the IT side. And we would love to help you with this. Again, take a look at your organization as it relates. There are assessment tools or assessment processes. Let us know if you're interested in that and reach out. We can absolutely help. As we said, we've talked about these 5 issues, the phantom IT, the overlapping services, CAPEX versus OPEX, leasing, risk review. Of these 5, I would say really the risk review and the phantom IT are the ones that I would take a look at mostly. But you know your organization, both whether you're on a management side or an IT side. And then how can we help? Real simple. We'd love to have a 30-minute virtual or an in-person meeting, actually. We just want to talk with you about your status quo, expectations of 23, and answer any questions you have about your situation or circumstance. And Bob C at Simplex-IT.com if you're interested, and we'll set you up. And our final fun part is we do on the pure managed services where we take on the IT support for the entire organization, as well as we are the leader. So we've written the only 2 books on the topic of co-managed IT services. So we've got that as well. And Ryan, you joining up. You want to introduce yourself and add anything to this?
Yep. Hey, everybody. So piggyback track off what Bob said as well. So obviously you can reach out to him. You can also reach out to myself as well. The only difference is I'm Ryan at Simplex-IT.com. So I'm the business development executive. So happy and here to answer your questions. Whatever you guys need, we can get you started.
Also much more polite than I am. So that is pretty much our presentation. Any questions at this point? And any feedback? Was this useful? Okay.
Quiet bunch.
Absolutely.
You can
I
use the
think-
little reaction, like raise a hand, or is
think-
chat enabled? Yeah, chat.
Yeah,
enabled.
chat's enabled.
Chat's enabled.
Joseph's typing right now. I think he's got something.
Somebody actually said something recently about what you need to do for these types of situations is to say, I need 3 questions before I'm hanging up.
Someone just told me about that one. Yeah.
Hey, Joseph. Yeah, I think we've talked. Yeah, and I can't say I don't at all believe in competition. We absolutely, organizations compete, but there's stuff where the term I love is co-opetition. We're all in this together. So if we've got stuff that we can use or people can borrow from what we do, absolutely great.
That's honestly one of the biggest things I take away from all the conferences that I go to.
Yeah.
Yes, we're all competing-ish against each other, but like Bob said, it's co-opetition. I will absolutely tell any MSP at those conferences I like going to, where like, this is how I'm setting up this tool. This is how I'm handling this situation. Here's how I'm doing cybersecurity talks. Here's how I'm doing insurance talks. And it's great. People love listening to us when we're at the conferences. And you know what?
Yeah.
I love listening to other people. Come out of it with some just amazing ideas that I'm utilizing myself.
Absolutely. No, and Jeff, so when you take a look at the Phantom IT end of things, there's some actually decent articles that Microsoft has on 365 that they talk about using 365 services to do some discovery for web-based Phantom IT stuff and that kind of fun stuff. And then there's other tools as far as basically any kind of networking inventory tool. Like Kevin was saying, our stuff actually identifies installed applications. So if you think about it from the standpoint of you want to know what they're doing in the cloud, 365 resources can help you there. You want to know what they're installing on the corporate owned machines. Like Kevin was saying, any RMM tool should usually be able to help and give you an idea from that aspect of it. And then finally, and this is the one that I haven't wrap my head around, network discovery, where you're basically just looking to see things that are on the network that are taking up IP addresses or the like, that aren't part of the normal network. That will be people bringing in their own machines, so on and so forth. So those are kind of like the trifecta of things to look like when it comes to Phantom IT.
Spiceworks, I think, has a module for software assets, and that one's pretty much free. So that's a good way to go on that. There's lots of stuff out there. Microsoft actually recommends a tool. I've come across it for some of their audits, where you download this tool and you deploy it however you deploy it. It does inventories. Microsoft uses it usually for licensing audits, but it does come back with some more info as well.
And actually, that's a good point. We do have a special going on this month where we are offering free assessments that are performed between now and the end of the month. So if you are interested in that, check with Ryan, R-Y-A-N, at simplex-it.com. And because that will do a good amount of discovery of what we're talking about here. So
Yeah, the assessment will spit out about 50 to 60 reports, whether you want that much information or not. And we will, we can run through the results with you. We will give you a cheat sheet and kind of hone in on a lot of those things. And a lot of that stuff is itemized too. So it takes a lot of the guesswork out, which is nice.
cool. Okay, if there are no other questions, we don't have the date nailed down yet, but next month we are talking about budgets, IT budgets, and we are going to have a special guest for that as well. You're going to see a lot of guests on our webinars for between now and the rest of the year. So in the meantime, thanks everybody, and have a good day.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Cool. Take care.